we're really excited for it. And it's a really great group of, as we just talked about, people from all over the world right now. So we have some good perspectives. And yeah, we'll just start with introductions, basic introductions. So I'm Clara, and I was a mentee in the Insight Collaborative like mentorship program this summer, talking about like the paradigm shift in the humanitarian sector, which we'll talk about more. But yeah, I guess we can just go in order of the people on my screen right now. So Lena, and then Ghania, then Liz, then Madi, and then Michael. If you could all just give a basic introduction of yourself, your organization.
Thank you so much, Clara. So, hi everyone. My name is Lena Zahra, and I'm a board member with Insight Collaborative. I actually had the honor of being Mohammed and Clara's mentor this summer when we launched an online remote virtual mentorship program. So individuals kind of from all corners of the globe, in all sectors, could get an understanding of what we call the humanitarian sector and how we've truly had to adapt, especially during the global health pandemic. And I don't want to speak on behalf of Madi, but I had the pleasure of seeing just even Insight in its very early days in 2016, when I met Madi while volunteering in northern Greece and at Amini, in some of the informal what you would kind of deem as refugee camps, but typically kind of acute short-term housing for displaced individuals that cross through the Mediterranean. And I don't want to again speak on behalf of Madi, but from essentially this aspect of wanting to come together and having a storytelling platform, Insight has truly grown into a way that we are calling for more collaboration and calling for more collaboration with individuals and organizations on the ground, and having and maintaining these partnerships and relationships to be true authentic advocates. So we're so excited to kind of be in the space of advocacy and education and innovative action with like-minded organizations and individuals like World Relief and Finding Refuge and Give Duet. So we're very lucky and honored to have all of you here with us. So that's me though.
Hi everyone, my name is Ghania Chaudhry, and I am one of the co-founders of Finding Refuge, which is a small nonprofit that operates in Athens, Greece. Our main mission is to find and fund housing for vulnerable and neglected refugees in Athens, Greece, and that sounds a lot more simple than it really is. So we basically began last April, I think, is when I reached out to my co-founder Lena as well and was like, listen, I have an idea. And since then we've grown tremendously. Over the past year, we've housed about 106 people in about 35 different accommodations for various different time frames. And now we're starting our shelter, our community housing project called Dunya, which basically chose a name because it means world in so many different languages. It means the same thing. So that's why we call it Dunya, in which we're creating like support mechanisms and accompanying people in order to make sure that they're able to access their rights and their services they're entitled to, despite the really bad bureaucracy and kind of like situation in Greece. So we have a lot of amazing people living in the Dunya house right now. And it's really cool because they just started calling it Dunya too. So that's really exciting that they feel like it's their home and they're using the name that we gave it. And so, yeah. A little bit about myself. I am a university student. I'm in my second year of grad school at NYU. And I'm really excited to meet everyone and learn more about everyone's organization and work and how, we can adjust and learn more about this paradigm shift.
Hey everyone, I'm Liz Nelson. I work with World Relief Seattle over on the West Coast. We are a local nonprofit here that actually welcomes and receives refugees, asylees, immigrants here in the Western Washington area. So I manage our outreach team, which is a lot of volunteer coordination and communication. Our vision here is to have every immigrant and refugee welcomed by community, rooted in community, and empowered for community. So a lot of my role along with our team is figuring out how can we engage either a local Washingtonian community or former refugees, immigrants, asylees to kind of receive and welcome and come alongside those who are entering the US for the first time and really walk through that really intense, really tricky resettlement process when they first arrive, but then go on to really find that social rootedness connection that they may have left behind. So school enrollment especially is really tricky this year with COVID and meeting neighbors, navigating the city. We were talking before we started about how hard it is to navigate Seattle even as a visitor. So really working both with our staff, but also with the community here to do that ongoing process with folks newly arriving. So really happy to be with you guys.
Hi, you guys. I'm Madi. I am currently the president of Insight Collaborative and alongside Lena, one of the original founders. And Lena described the root of our organization and the methods behind it pretty well. But I'm super proud to say that this is the product of Lena's awesome focus group. We have Mohammed and Clara, of course, moderating today, but this was a group effort to create the event, come up with the questions, design kind of the overall theme of what we wanted this webinar to be. They've done an absolutely fabulous job, and I'm really excited to be here and hear the questions that they've prepared and everybody's answers. I'm excited to meet Liz. I know Michael and I were serendipitously introduced by a mutual friend, and Ghania was put in touch with me by Lena, and so it's just nice to have everybody, all these like-minded individuals on one webinar, so I'm super excited.
I very much forgot the order. Am I meant to be introducing myself now?
Yes, I think you're next, and then Mohammed.
Perfect. So my name is Michael Cesar. I'm one of the co-founders of Duet. We were founded a little over a year ago, and we are a tech-enabled aid distribution and giving platform. We were founded on the island of Lesbos, and we look to connect individual givers to individual recipients through individual businesses, all trying to champion choice, connection, and community. A little bit of an intro of how it works. One of the refugees that we work with will walk into a local store on the island, a store that we partner with. They'll take a photo of what they need. They upload that photo through our Refugee app. That item immediately gets populated on our website. A donor browsing our website can choose to donate that item. As soon as that happens, we transfer that money to the local store and we send the refugee a pickup code. As early as the very next day, the refugee can then walk back into the store, show the store owner the pickup code, and then they send us a photo of the item, confirming that they've picked it up and that there are no issues or, it's not broken or anything like that. With their permission, and what's pretty wonderful is we sort of usually get it, and they actually have really enjoyed doing this. They usually send on a thank you message to the donor to close the loop.
Awesome. And then Mohammed, if you're there, you can introduce yourself. I don't know.
Yes.
Oh.
Yes, do you hear me?
Sort of. I think your connection is a little unstable, but.
Yes, but I'm here, still here. Yes, my connection is too slow. I'm sorry for that. Can you hear me?
Okay, Mohammed, there's you're breaking up a little bit, at least on my end, but maybe if you get some better connection in a minute, you can try again to introduce yourself, but he will also,
Okay.
oh, okay.
Yes. So, did you hear me? Do you hear me now?
Yes. Yeah, and you can
Yes.
also
My
type
name
in
is
chat if you want, but
Yes, my name is Mohammed. I've joined this mentorship program in the month of July. I really enjoyed this experience. I think that it's a life-changing experience. The way we are connected from all around the globe in one platform to an humanitarian objective. That's really intelligent, and that's really smart way to help others and to reconnect to reconnect all the world. For me, I really enjoyed the experience, and I wanted to repeat it another time. And I'm really glad, guys, that we are in this event, and that we are making it. And I'm excited to do this and to hear your answers.
yes, thank you so much. Okay, well, yeah, thank you everyone. We will kind of just start and go into some questions. Both Mohammed and I have some questions prepared, but also, you know, we want this to be pretty informal, like conversation based. So if we only end up getting through one question, then talking about that for the whole time, then that's totally fine. If we get through all of them and then, you know, find more to ask, that's also fine. But as you all know, and as we've touched on a little bit, our main topic for today's discussion is to see how some nonprofit organizations are adopting like non-traditional humanitarian approaches towards migrant and refugee populations. So, and specifically in relation to COVID, because that's the context that we're all in right now. And then so during our Insight like mentorship program, we talked a lot about the paradigm shift that some of you have touched on already, but this is basically a shift that we believe needs to happen within the humanitarian sector. And we've defined that shift loosely as kind of moving away from like a savior complex model, or these models that, you know, just kind of give aid like from afar and then just move on, towards like models of accompaniment and collaboration with the stakeholders, which is a model that it seems like all of your organizations use and have. And so our first question has to do sort of with regarding the system of giving aid. I'm interested in what are the guiding principles and like practical methods of your respective organizations that you use to just first like assess the needs of your population. And what like specific needs do you try to address, and how do you understand what the population that you're giving aid to really needs from you? And then anybody can start.
I think can I start, because for mine is kind of simple.
I was going to say, Clara, real quick, a word of advice: just pick someone and go. It was good that Ghania took the initiative, but just like whoever's on your screen, pick them and go.
Perfect. Okay, Ghania, then we'll start with you.
Yeah. I think I wanted to start just because like for us, we have a very narrow kind of like in our mission, just housing is our primary focus, and everything that comes out of that, then we add to our mission statement. So for us, like we basically saw the need of our like beneficiaries and our like the communities that we help firsthand while we were volunteering in Athens. And we saw that housing was consistently like a service gap in which, like, you know, you had food coming to people, you had like healthcare, but you still had people and families and women and children sleeping on the streets. And that's still happening currently. You go to this square called Victoria Square and you have like over 200 people sleeping on the ground in this park. And, you know, it's consistently something that really needs kind of like, you know, needs to be addressed. And I think normative actors of humanitarian aid, like the UNHCR, the government, they're failing at it. They're creating systems to exacerbate the situation and create more homelessness, you know, and the bureaucracy. And then later on, what we find with this current project is that it's not just homelessness. It's the fact that the bureaucratic structures are so intricate that it's hard for people to navigate how to access like new services and new forms of aid. And so that's what we realized through hands-on experience with the community, like working with the community, having friends that are unfortunately in this situation, have gone through like these situations. And so from the housing, you talk about other things they need. So when everyone applies for housing in the Dunya house, they come with the 3-month goal, right? And the idea is that you've gotten housing, so what else do you need? And they have different needs. Someone wants to learn how to register for their application, their asylum card, or their ID card. Someone wants to learn English. Someone wants to enroll their brother in school. So that's how we like learn about other needs, is by direct contact, talking to people individually, understanding like if they had this time where they have the safe place to call home, what would they do with it? So it's just, you know, understanding through experiences, talking to people, and having that one-on-one conversation where you're actually talking to someone as a human and not just like inferring what their need is. Sorry, so anyone wants to?
With the refugee resettlement side over in the U.S., it's a really interesting kind of task that we have, because we're one of 9 refugee resettlement agencies contracted by the US government, and there's really strict requirements of what someone's able to receive, the steps that they go through when they're first resettled. But we know that's not enough. The communities we're working with know that that's not enough. And so we've been really creative about kind of building out programs and building out resources and connecting to recently arrived communities to figure out where are the gaps, what do people need. So for us, that looks like a lot of focus groups right now during COVID. That's a lot of calling, not just our current, what we refer to as our participants, but also past participants who have been here for the past 5 years, because their resettlement period might be up, but that doesn't mean that everything is going well, or they might not have other new things coming up, or potentially skills and resources that they could lend back to the community that's recently arrived. So that looks like focus groups, it's phone calls, it's checking in and seeing what technology needs people have. You might say, we have this great program, we have this great English class, we have this great thing, by the way, it's online. You need an internet connection, you need a computer that can be just yours, you need a quiet space to access it. So being able to go back to kind of what's actually going on and say, what would you need in order to meet the goals that you have for this season, whether it is accessing the English class or getting a job or getting your kids in school, what have you. But I think especially through COVID, it's been really, really important not just to take like a grant or something that says this is obviously a need in the community, go fix it, go meet it, but to start in a slower, more complex way and go back to those conversations, go back to the folks who have just arrived, go back to the people who have been here for a few years, and work backwards. So it's meant that we've actually said no to some funding because we don't see that as a need. And it's meant that we've used private funding or gone after specific funding so that we can meet the felt needs of the community. It's how our women's sewing class came to be. It's how our next gen youth programs and summer academy came to be. It's how our community garden came to be. All of these projects that wouldn't necessarily be part of the refugee resettlement program that came out of those conversations initially. But I'd say it's always a learning process.
So really with Duet's inception, the main focus was always to put as much decision-making power into the hands of refugees as possible. The first thing we identified was that, very much individual people have individual needs that are completely tailored to them. And we very much didn't want to sort of prescribe any of, anything that anybody needed. So, it's built into the core of our platform. We give our families a budget every month, but within that budget and within our partner stores, they can request whatever they would like, or whatever they need. And it means we naturally have a huge range of things that get requested. Not everything is guaranteed to be donated, but, we have things like people often request shoes in the first month and a kettle. Pretty much every single time it's those things, but there are always a couple of very unique things, like maybe someone, we had a volleyball get requested because there was a young man who was a avid volleyball player from Afghanistan, or we had somebody requested a map and a compass, like a north-south-west compass, because he was using it to navigate the island, instead of using a data plan on his phone. So we, within the limits of the partner stores and within a few guidelines, we wouldn't ever sort of let weapons or certain things like that appear on our site. The thing that our partner stores, which is a pretty big range of supplies in terms of those stores, people can request whatever they need.
Okay,
Yeah,
I couldn't tell if you were done or if you had frozen. I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, well, at Insight, something that kind of makes our work difficult is that we don't have a super narrowed focus, nor do we have a very specified platform. What we really aim to do, and this is something that Lena can certainly attest to, Ghania, Michael, people who are in the field in third countries, if you're operating in an environment that you're unfamiliar with, there's a whole host of barriers that you need to overcome as someone trying to function in a society that's drastically different than yours. And those barriers, I kind of identify them as perceived barriers, where someone feels like it's a really big thing that they have to overcome when it's not, versus actual barriers. And oftentimes what we do as humanitarian actors is make assumptions about what those barriers are, instead of actually sitting down and asking people themselves where they're really struggling. And what we've found is that in some sectors, housing is certainly one of them, food security is one of them as well. But in many situations, there actually is a wide variety of resources available. And as Liz said, there's usually just one little teeny tiny minute detail that's keeping people from accessing them correctly, whether that's connectivity, whether that's something as simple as a language barrier. And so what we try to do first when we go into situations is establish a network. Here in Turkey, before we decide if we want to go through the process of establishing anything here, the first thing that we do is we meet with community members, representatives of the community that's being affected. We also meet with representatives of the organizations that are in charge of supplying these services, and asking them, what are your perceptions of how you're doing? What are you offering? How are you offering it? How is it available? What challenges do you face? And then we can go to the community and ask them, and kind of put the two side by side and see how well it lines up to get an idea of the situation. So our assessment method really varies from context to context, but one thing that's very uniform is that we really want to see first what services are available, and then we want to inquire after the population, is this something that you need? Is this something that you're able to access? And if you're not able to access it, what barriers are in the way of that process?
Yeah, it seems like a commonality between all of your approaches is kind of really trying to focus on the individual, but at the same time, it's like a push and a pull, because you want to give effective community-based aid as well. So you can't, tailor your aid to one person every single time. So that's tough, but that's really cool. Mohammed, I believe you have the next question.
Yes.
If you want to ask it.
Yes. Yes, Clara, me too. So my second question for you all is to what extent and how do you implement the refugees in your work in different stages? For example, the stage of planning, the implementation stage, and also the evaluation stage. How do you implement the refugees in all of these stages? So anybody can begin.
I can take that first if you
If you
guys want.
want.
Yeah.
Okay, go on,
Um,
Maddie.
yeah, so the affected, something that we recognize, especially COVID has made it incredibly obvious how important this is. When we're operating multiple projects in multiple countries, it's impossible for one solid representative of the organization to be present in all of those projects, especially now. Like I haven't been able to get back to Greece, and as a US passport holder, we don't know when we will. We can't get into Lebanon. It really emphasized the importance of localizing leadership. And so for all of our projects, from the assessment through the planning and implementation, the affected community is involved. So what that looks like is oftentimes like, you know, focus groups are a common theme, or one-on-one meetings with members of the community to say, you know, what are you guys struggling with? How do you need our help? And when it comes to the planning and implementation of the interventions as well, we typically have that designed by the community members, because they're going to know the logistics of the situation much better than we are. And so it's kind of nice because it's very hands off for us, where they can say like these are our needs, here's how you can help us meet them, and this is our plan to implement and execute that. And so from our standpoint, it's pretty simple, and it makes it a lot easier for all of us.
Yeah, I think I can also add on to that. I think for us, our project primarily runs off of like localizing the work in Greece, in Athens particularly, because of the fact that like both Lena and I are like remote because we're university students, so we have to go back and forth often. So like the way we've done is actually like, you know, like hiring and like incorporating an on-site coordinator, which actually is Suhail. He is a refugee from Syria, actually. He likes to say he's from Dara. So he really likes where he's from. But I think the benefit of having this is that we, you know, like we know what we've been told about like the process, but he's been through it. So when we do interviews, he knows when people like things are off about their case, or like things that we might need to refer to our asylum support team or stuff like that. So I think the benefit of having someone that's gone through the process of applying for housing, applying for asylum, applying for this new government program called Helios is not just the fact that like you have someone that's an asset, but you could integrate their experiences into your entire process of like providing aid. And it's also most of our like long-term volunteers and like employees are actually refugees themselves, and we do that very intentionally because I think it's really, you know, like they know the offices, they know the bureaucratic apparatus is a lot better than some other people, and also like the beneficiaries connect better with them than like, someone who doesn't really know, you know, about their situation, what they've been through themselves, you know. So I think it's really important to have that kind of like aspect, and for us because we're, you know, we're kind of two facet Athens in the US, so it gives us more control over what's happening on the ground as well.
Seattle, I think it's really important for us, kind of like what you were saying, Ghania, where the people who are receiving and walking alongside refugees and asylees have that background themselves. You might not be from the same place. It may not have looked the same for you based on when you came and what your story is, but about 40% of our staff have immigrant, refugee, or asylee background themselves, and that's really key for us to have the trust, have the knowledge, have the authority to speak into a process that me as a white woman who was born and raised in the Pacific Northwest definitely does not have. And then on my end, on the outreach side, because we do so much work to bring the community alongside, which is often a dominant culture, primarily English-speaking community, there's a lot of work that we'll do around, like, what's the language that we use? What's the posture that we take? what is the humility and what are all of the things that Clara was saying at the beginning that we need to remove. Our savior complexes are assumptions that someone needs help, our assumption that someone has a need before you enter into that space. And that goes all the way down to the words that we use, even saying something like, we welcome refugees, or putting that sign in your yard. Who is we and who are we to welcome refugees? And you're already creating this us and them philosophy behind that. So really, it's a slower process, and it takes a lot of patience, and it is so humbling to be working in this space. And I, catch myself all the time, and I'm still learning from my coworkers and the people that are coming into the US more recently. But I think for us, it really is, I would say more of our work, like the true work in a way, is bringing the dominant culture English speaking community onto the same page of being a safe and supportive place for refugees, asylees, immigrants coming in.
So we're in a slightly different situation where we don't actually have an on-the-ground footprint. We exist in the internet sort of thing. We are on-the-ground operations are completely managed by our partner stores and the families we work with. So we don't actually have which was definitely a goal of ours, is we don't actually have a Duet employee or a Duet worker in the location. The way we sort of get around the need for that is we rely heavily on our partner organizations. So, for example, we don't make any of the initial decisions on the families we do and do not work with. We rely on partner organizations who have much more have a specialty in that regard, to do that vetting process for us. So they point us towards the families who are in the greatest need, and who they think would benefit most from the tool that effectively we are. But sort of now that the tool has been created and iterated upon, the only input we sort of continually need are really just iterative. As we go into version 2.0 of our Refugee app, we make sure we do the proper sort of user interviews and user testings for, the user interface. But for our day-to-day operations, there actually doesn't need to be a lot of input, which is sort of by design.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, no, that's awesome. And the fact that, especially Ghania and Liz, what you were talking about having your leadership be people that have been in the position of the aid populations that you're working with, the stakeholder populations themselves, like that is really vital and really important. And that's just good for anybody who is entering that sector. Like, from my background, for example, just like as a student going to university who has never had those types of experiences, just to remember like what leadership groups I want to be like a part of. And then, yeah, Ghania.
I'll add something. I think something that we value as an organization ourselves is that we like to partner with organizations run by the community themselves. So that's something that's very valuable as well, in terms of not just localizing your efforts if you don't see that happening, but connecting with like groups and organizations and activists that are from like the refugee communities themselves. Because like I just remember when you were talking about being at university, the first time I like was exposed to kind of the situation was from like a refugee-led group in like Athens. So I think like learning from their perspectives is like really incredible, and how they bring their community together. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's exactly the type of like accompaniment model that we want to see, and that's like hopefully really effective. Yeah, so my next question is, I guess, sort of a two-parter, but kind of generally, like, what are some of the limitations that you face, and I'm sure they're not few, while trying to achieve this paradigm shift? So, limitations that you might face because of choosing a model of accompaniment or like more personalized aid. And then in the second part, if you'd like to address kind of how it's been working in the context of COVID, because that's a huge limitation. And I know it looks probably different for each of your organizations. So those of you that are working directly with these people, or Michael, I'm interested in how it works with kind of like more like hands-off approach for like the refugees themselves. So just in terms of like, restrictions of movement, like the legalities of the areas that you're in. Yeah. Ghania, do you want to start with this one? I don't really know what the situation is like in Greece right now, just in terms of how you're able to like directly work that.
Yeah. So I guess there's like a few, like there's some layers of like difficulties. So I'll start like with like the legality stuff. So in Greece, like in terms of like formal NGOs, and this is why our organization is um, very unique, because we really focus on aid delivery first, and then focus more on kind of like understanding the legal implications. That sounds really bad, but I think like our focus is really much like, how do we get the best services, the best ways to service the people in the way that they want, and so in terms of providing services in Greece, it's become a lot more complicated as like the new right-wing government came in. They kind of like came a lot strict with organizations, and also criminalizing humanitarian aid, etc. So you have to be very specific and very very cautious about who you're helping in housing, especially in the housing sector. Like, no one wants to work on housing. It's always something that, no, it's too complicated. You're liable for providing someone shelter, and whatever happens, it's your liability. And so for our organization, we're very much, okay, like we see this issue, like we rather value the safety of these people than the safety of ourselves, in that sense. So I think in terms of that, but then there's another layer where you have like in Athens, it's very complex, because there's, while there's like, it's hard to deliver aid, there's like a proliferation of organizations. So you have organizational competition that interferes, and you have limited funding. And so it's always like, if you need something from an organization, like for example, for us, like another like limitation is our funding is very, very limited. We are an organization that like almost like 100% of our inflows goes out to the people that need it. So we have very little like stuff left after the month, and so like accessing like things like getting simple I went to an organization today to get diapers, and I got like 10 diapers for like the 20 people in our building. So it's hard to access and gain these like things, and there's always like competition, and it's not very a collaborative environment, unfortunately. So that's also another limitation. And then I think the other limitation is just operational capacity. I think that's another layer of limits that can serve to inhibit kind of like our work. And that's why we've had to change our model from like the apartment model, which was more like if we get more funding, we're able to help like a lot. People would prefer that because it's their own space in the apartments. But the issue is when you're running like 6 or 7 apartments and you have one person as your coordinator, the poor guy can't go around to 6 apartments a day and check, and stuff like that. And if something happens in one of the apartments to fix it, like it's like something that really is hindering. So also organizational capacity as well. Because if we were going to, our like theory is, if we're gonna have like someone who is a refugee work for us, like I prefer that they get paid, and it wouldn't be free, because it's their labor. It's really the whole point is to help them become self-sufficient. So how can we take a refugee's labor and not provide like some sort of payment if they actually need it? So yeah, I think that's kind of like where we are. Yeah. Oh, okay. Did I answer the question wrong?
No, not at all. Not at all. I just wanted to make sure that it was clear. But yeah, no, you answered it very well. Yeah, those are a lot of different layers of kind of barriers, and you have to be creative when you're navigating how to, you know, go about giving that aid. So that was great. Yeah, anybody else?
Just pick on someone.
Okay, Liz, did you unmute for a minute?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's barriers no matter when you're working and what you're doing. We're all nonprofit and we're all working in a really changing environment. And I would also note that we are all in this work because someone had something horrible happen to them. And that is what has given us all jobs, which is just an acknowledgement that is hard to swallow sometimes. But with COVID, we are still an essential service here. So we've been operating since the beginning, but all remote. So our office is closed, and our caseworkers, our employment team, our English teachers, all of our staff are connecting with people either by phone or by video call, or occasionally like an in-person doc drop if they need to sign a legal document, which is just a huge, huge barrier to being able not just to do the work that someone needs to do when they arrive, but also to build a relationship and to get to know someone, to understand how it's going for them and their family, and then to connect them to those relationships. One thing that has shifted that I see as a positive thing is we've been connecting people who have recently arrived with like a volunteer or a community member or a former participant to kind of have that one-on-one. I wouldn't so much call them a tutor as I would just call them like a cultural companion, someone to connect with, to practice English if that's what you need, or just to check in and see how things are going. And that's something that has shifted pretty well to virtual because people aren't driving across the city trying to coordinate their schedules, things like that. I feel like there was something else. Oh, another big thing is just a lot of services are closed. Social Security offices being closed, DSHS, USCIS. These are huge barriers. So we have folks who are arriving in the US legally authorized to work, but without access to their Social Security card because Social Security is closed. So you are essentially on hold for 6 months, not waiting for your status, not waiting for your visa or anything like that, just literally waiting for that piece of paper when an office is closed. So that's been really challenging.
So, you know, our biggest challenge right now is definitely on the donor front. You know, we're focused on, you know, we're sort of a new product category in terms of this sort of three-sided model that incorporates these three stakeholders. And that's something that we need to, you know, in any new product category, there's a certain amount of education that will have to go along with our marketing. And that's something that really hasn't gotten off the ground as much as I would have liked. And it's something that is our main focus right now. You know, we're asking for a little bit of a behavioral shift from our donors, not just to sort of, you know, Venmo $10, but, you know, there's actually an activity that needs to be done, a connection that needs to be made, you know, a choice that needs to be made on the donor's behalf that we're trying to encourage. And in order to do that, or doing that successfully is definitely our biggest roadblock right now. You know, I think it's just sort of the reality of the situation that there is always going to be more people that we could help than donation dollar available. And that will sort of probably continue to be our biggest roadblock and our biggest bottleneck. But it certainly is our biggest challenge right now and what we're working on the most. When it comes to COVID-19, you know, we don't think the aid distribution process should involve anyone really asking for anything. I think there can be a little bit of a dignity hit if you're sort of going to someone and asking for toiletries or sort of basic hygiene products. So, you know, from the beginning, there was no interaction. You know, we didn't really want there to be much interaction. You know, there's no sort of, you don't need to get permission from anyone in person, or you don't need to go meet someone in a central location. So whilst the stores are open, we operate completely as normal. Of course, we ran into huge our operations effectively had to grind to a halt as soon as the stores closed. So that was, a huge issue. And, we worked on it, but didn't actually have a solution by the time the stores reopened. If the stores, if we'd been told the stores were closed for the next 3 years, I'm not sure how we would solve it. But, because that's kind of what we rely on. But now that the stores have reopened, it's sort of COVID-19 makes no difference. In fact, on the donation side, I think there's been a increase, at least for us, in the understanding of, it's almost as if people are taking more time now to understand the woes of the world, and are actually putting a little bit more of attention to it. I think that's also tied in with the growth of the BLM movement. And, although I'm very, very happy that a lot of focus and attention has been put towards that, I think the overall impact has also been a wider appreciation for the troubles in the world. So I think actually Duet has sort of benefited from that overall understanding. So that, to look for a silver lining in COVID might be, even at its core, inappropriate, but that's the one that's there, at least on that side.
Yeah, I mean, limitations is a funny thing with what we do at Insight, because when it comes to advocacy, I think Michael made a good point that you're always trying to sort of educate people on one side of the issue or another. There's a lot of education. And something that's always frustrated me is that from day one, I, as an individual and as an organization, we've been very passionate about including the affected population, refugees, migrants, whatever you want to call them, including them in our entire process. But what's really frustrating is that we're asking people to come and participate in a system that sets them up for failure. There's still deeply seated issues of colonialism and neoliberalism in all of the humanitarian systems. The very systems that are there to support people are actually ones that put them in this situation in the first place. And so I would say that these global systemic issues tend to be the biggest limitations that we have, whether that's at a very small organizational level of saying, yeah, we want this entire thing to be run by a refugee, and you give all of this responsibility to someone who's given no training on how to do it. They're doing it in their second or third language, and they're not given the appropriate support network to maintain the job. And then when it sets them up for failure. And then when they fail, people say, oh, this is why we don't do that. That's something that's been incredibly frustrating for me to witness as a volunteer, as someone in the medical profession. We have all of these incredibly talented, licensed medical professionals sitting in camps and in cities where they've been resettled because the system will not grant them the right to work. And meanwhile, all of us in the medical sector, especially with COVID, are saying we don't have enough doctors and nurses. So the systemic limitations, I see a lot of waste of human potential, and that's probably the biggest frustration that we face day to day. And then with COVID, I think one of the biggest issues that everyone sort of touched on is that, like, the connection piece of, whether you're trying to cultivate a system or an environment like Duet does, where you remove the humanitarian actor entirely. That's like a perfect world to me. But in some of these situations, when we're needing to cultivate a sense of community, a sense of welcome, and a sense of home, that day-to-day interaction with people and that contact is very important for building those trusting relationships. And of course, we have a whole host of logistical issues that we faced with COVID. That's not unique to this sector. It's not unique to our organization or the process. That's like a global issue we're all having right now. But the inability to connect with people, I think, and have that really degrade trust has been the biggest limitation that we've had for accompaniment, when the very basis of the model implies that we come alongside people and build those relationships.
Can I, because I misunderstood the question. I think for us, COVID, because we've already worked kind of remotely in general, because before when we're doing apartment searches, we do our interviews on kind of like from the beginning, like calling people. And so like our like organization in terms of like the day-to-day work wasn't really effective unless like it was just like Sohail putting on a mask when he's giving the rent to the landlord. But now that we've shifted our model, it's been a little bit trickier just because in Greece, like, there's corona, but not a lot of people take it seriously. Like, they're not really taking COVID seriously. The government is obviously, you have to wear a mask with a face mask, so it's hard getting people to like understand the risks associated. And then, like, you know, like if we have other, like, we have asylum support people come to help with people with their asylum applications. They work in different organizations, and so those organizations get more people coming in and out, more volunteers. And a lot of the concern is that volunteers come like from different countries, and they're bringing in like kind of like COVID, or like, you know, and so then we have concern regarding like, you know, connecting with like our like volunteers and where they're going. And so it's that people element, you know, it's something that's really vital to our operations now in this model, and understanding how we can keep people safe and prevent kind of the spread of COVID is very something we're still trying to figure out how to do. So yeah, that's one limitation.
Something else too that happened in Greece that I think is worth mentioning, because we have like 3 of the 4 panelists operate in Greece. The Greek government, so in the very beginning of COVID, of course, it was incredibly obvious that the population density in the camps in the North Aegean Islands was going to be a huge problem. There were widespread public health campaigns from a bunch of humanitarian actors and global health actors to say, there was like a trending hashtag that was decongest the camps. And there was a big push to decongest. Someone put out an awesome infographic that showed, you know, the population density of New York, of your average block in Manhattan, up against the population density of Lesbos, Moria camp. And to demonstrate how quickly this would spread and how deadly it would be in these types of situations. So the response to that from the government, and this is something that we're seeing the consequences of as of now anecdotally, but very soon I think the data is going to start catching up. But people, especially families and people coming from places like Gaza, certain regions of Syria and Iraq, Afghanistan, people that used to have, like, you would look at their case and be like, I've been in the sector for 4 years. I know when you look at a case, if it's a strong one or not at this point with the Greek government. You look at their case and think this is not super strong. Sometimes their lawyer will even tell them this is not super strong. They're getting granted asylum because what ends up happening is 4 months or a month, so 4 weeks after they're given their papers, they're cutting all of their services. So they lose their housing, they lose their cash card that they use to access food services. And the result of the pandemic is that places, even like Athens, is still relatively well served compared to other areas. A lot of organizations did have to drastically reduce their operational capacity to be in compliance with social distancing and with keeping people safe. We don't have enough international volunteers. We can only use the affected population to a certain extent. They can't drive legally unless they have residency and a license. That's a big problem. And so we rely very heavily on international volunteers for things like driving and transporting goods to and from the camps. And the lockdown on the camps has been a significant issue. And so I know that at Give Duet, they can attest to the problems of people being phased out of that pending asylum status. They lose a lot of the things that they were receiving for just basic survival, like being able to live in a camp. Even though it's not a great situation, the result of Victoria Square being as crowded as it is right now is because people were losing that government sponsored housing. And this is all, you know, there's downstream consequences of everything that are unanticipated. We cannot possibly go through barrier analysis and risk analysis to identify every single thing. The decongestion of the camp seemed like a very good idea at the time. But now what we're seeing is an increase of people who are in complete destitution in the mainland because they were given asylum or they were given the freedom to travel. And it's now coming back to bite us and making it much harder to keep people safe than it would have been in the camps if we had taken a different course of action. So yeah, I just wanted to add that because we have so many people on this panel who work and operate in Greece. And I think it's something that's really important for us to think about with the pandemic, is that this, I think a lot of us recognize and feel like this is not over and there's still a lot of consequences that we're going to see from this, but I anticipate that it's going to get significantly worse. It's not like, oh, okay, we decongested the camps, coast is clear. We're still up for a lot of challenges in that region of the world, especially.
Yeah, and I can add, like, it's like they're decongesting the like islands, but they're also creating more congestion in the camps in the mainland. So what's happening is that what people are going to stay in Victoria Square, they're sleeping there at night, under this false premise that the government will take them and put them in a camp here because they have no other home in Athens. So they're taken into Camp Ilionis, which is just on the outside of like the city center, camps around Athens, the mainland. And now in Ilionis, you have like giant tents, and you have 200 people in these tents in these really bad conditions. We had a housing application from someone living in Illinois actually, and they sent me these horrendous videos about the conditions there. So they're creating worsening, similar like Lesbo like conditions in like the camps here. And so like they're going to them, and there's like closed detention centers as well that they're sending people. So it's like it's kind of like a false sense of hope they're giving people, and then the premise of it doesn't make sense to me, because if you're trying to protect people from getting corona or COVID in islands, but they're taking and creating the same system in like Athens and the camps around the mainland, then is there any like benefit from doing this? And the benefit is they're like, they're saving money, so I think it's very interesting to see that happening and having people talk about that, and then people actually have thinking that the government's going to help them with like their papers and getting their ID cards, and like they're just going to go to a camp far away, and then they have to come back to Athens to do everything regardless. So it's interesting to see that too.
Yeah, thank you, Ghania. And oh yeah, Michael, go ahead. Did you have something?
Yeah, I was just going to respond to actually sort of both of you in terms of I think one thing that gets understated also in the impact of COVID and the knock-on effects will actually be the effect on the local Greek economy, especially in the islands. They're almost equal part stakeholder in sort of the Duet system as the refugees are. And I've been talking with some sort of local representatives and on sort of the Greek side and the local Greek community side, and missing out on the tourism of the summer and all the seasonal jobs. They're looking at mass unemployment in the winter months. And that sort of led to an even more important, the income, the revenue that refugees now provide to our partner stores is becoming a more and more significant percentage of their revenue every month. And that's a great thing in terms of, a shift in perception for the sort of the value and the integration aspect of refugees into the community. But it's also, a problem that's just going to grow animosity even larger as sort of the public coffers get much smaller towards January.
Yeah, thank you. I think that you guys are doing a great job of kind of illustrating the contradictions within kind of the modes that you guys are operating in, just because every action or every direction that you go in, it has a reaction from a different, side, super multifaceted issues. So we do have one Q&A question. I know that we're at the end of the hour, so if you have to leave, or if you all, want to wrap up, we can. But if you can stay, then Mohammed will just go ahead and ask this one last question to Liz, and then we can wrap up.
Okay, that's our last question. Is in the Q&A.
Mohammed, can you just wait one? Sorry, can you wait one moment?
Yes.
I just want to make sure the panelists get a chance to respond. So again, like Clara mentioned, if you have to get going, we really want to honor and respect your time, but of course, we'd love to have you on for a few minutes. So of course, your call though, absolutely. Yeah? Okay, great. Okay, go ahead, Mohammed.
Okay, our last question will be on the functional aspect of paradigm shift, and how do you manage with the rigidity that comes from confirming with government bureaucracy. We know that the paradigm shift consists of contacting with others, and there is a lot of connection. So how do you manage that, guys? And with
Yeah,
also the rigidity of bureaucracy.
that's a really good question. And I think there's a couple layers there. One is the rigidity of bureaucracy and the requirements that someone has when they're first coming into the United States. And then there's the rigidity of COVID and what you can and can't do and what is and is not open. I think for us, it's like has been mentioned a couple of times before, it's really been a challenge to maintain those relationships and to build trust when you can't have that face-to-face time. That has been a really big platform for us, a really core part of who we are and what we do to build relationships, mutual transformation. So that has been a challenge. I think for us, it just means more time, starting your phone calls gently, asking about how things are, leaving long pauses so people have time to process information. And then lots of following up. Say, we had this conversation, we talked about these things that needed to get done. They were essential services that we needed to figure out with you. It was a lot of business, it was a lot of paperwork, it was a lot of signatures. This is just a call to see how you're doing. For our Refugee Youth Summer Academy, which is normally a 5-week program, that's one of the things that came out of focus groups with parents. They're saying, you know, we're fine, we'll be okay, we're figuring this out, we're navigating our new resources, our new area, our new neighborhood, but we're really worried about our kids. And so this year, instead of scrapping Summer Academy because of COVID, we moved it online. We made sure families had the access to technology that they needed. And now we're finding that that's been a huge asset as families move into the school year, where we've built those relationships throughout the summer in a definitely more awkward, more work, more creativity kind of a program. But now we have some of that relationship to go into what could have been a very logistically complex kind of bureaucratic system to get kids enrolled in school and figuring that out. So I don't know if we're doing it perfectly yet. We are still learning, but it means more time, more space, and just a shift in expectation, I think.
Yeah, that's a perfect way to summarize that. Thank you so much, Liz. I think, you know, in order to kind of just culminate all these, you know, really powerful things that, you know, especially for individuals that are not familiar with this context or even working in the field, you know, this is a lot to take in. So I think a great way, you know, to close out would be kind of to hear from our panelists, you know, is there, you know, a piece of advice you can give to everyone on the call or watching this later, you know, what's something, you know, a call to action, what can they do, you know, to take away everything that they've learned from this call and, you know, embody or emulate these kind of in their communities or in their work or in their advocacy. So I kind of will leave it open up to all, you know, all of you to kind of think about, you know, what advice you might give. It could be one piece of advice or a few, you know, 3 main things. But I would love to share with everyone, because we have such a great breadth and depth of individuals and organizations of what they can do, whether they're here in the States or beyond. So if you guys don't mind, maybe we'll go in this order. Why don't we have Michael, Liz, Ghania, and then Madi. How about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think my advice is twofold. One, think of the entire system. You know, it's very, very easy to get hyper focused on one need or one situation, and you miss the forest for the trees. You know, Madi sort of, I think, very accurately kind of assessed that all these things have knock-on effects. Everything's interrelated, and you know, there is this innate almost conflict between the individual and the collective, and you have to be able to address both at all times. So you know, never sacrifice one for the other, never stay hyper-focused on one or the other, because then you'll miss things. I think the second part is to then just be creative and be innovative. There are so many resources available right now, so much young talent, so many people who are interested in contributing their skills, that this sector is not restricted in the same way it used to be by either sort of industry best practices in technology, in marketing, in education. There is this access to information and resources that we now have that, there's no reason why we can't all have as strong brands as Nike does and as Disney does. We can produce incredible content like they can. We have access to these things. We have, even just simple things like the access to stock footage is now pervasive. There are things that we can do and ideas and best practices we can steal from other industries and have access to now that we didn't used to be able to, and we should be using those in our industry as well. So number one, don't be hyper focused, don't sacrifice either the community or the individual. Definitely work with both, definitely understand both are important. And number two, steal best practices and use all the resources to get creative and do incredible things.
Thanks, Michael. I think my advice would be, when you see a program or when you see a need or when you see funding or something that's happening or there's this great idea, kind of take a pause and take a look and see if you can figure out who came up with that idea and why, who was around that table, whose table was it in the first place when that program came to being. And if it wasn't, if the creation of that wasn't by and for the people for whom it will benefit, there are inherently flaws. It will be a problematic system and you're going to fight with it all the way down the line. Doesn't mean you can't work with it. Doesn't mean you don't, work with a government program or work with government funding, but just be aware that that's what you're dealing with. And so, like Michael's saying, get creative and figure out how do you put as much space in something so that the people who are asking for something or will benefit from something are there from the very beginning.
I think for me, and I think finding refuge, and I think the perspectives that I come from is very much centering like yourself in the community and who you're, like, I don't want to say trying to help because I hate using the term help, but what communities are you trying to collaborate and work with? Because I think the most important, and what we're trying to get rid of, this white savior kind of like, we're up here, they're down here kind of idea, is like we need to come at the same level, and how can we work with them, everyone together? I think the first thing is coming through acknowledging your privilege, the fact that, for example, I have a US passport. I know right now I can't travel to many places, but before, like, that's like has giving me some privilege, the fact that I have network connectivity, a laptop, a phone that works, like, that's all a certain form of privilege that I have that I can utilize to elevate and work with people who are in this situation, unfortunately, and are very like-minded and very, well educated and everything. And I think for people who are more kind of like not as much as like, on the ground as I am, or like as people like on here right now, is that the way you can do that is like looking up and doing research on community-led initiatives and programs. So I'm just going to give a shout out to a few here in Greece, that US and Research, Jafra Foundation, and looking up, they're run by Palestinian refugees who lived in Yarmouk camp, Syrian Greek Youth Forum, Students of Humanity, and there's so many other organizations, and looking and understanding where they're coming from, who they're like, what their projects are, and how we can support those specific organizations. Because I think that's the starting point. And once you make a connection and maybe go volunteer with those organizations, another one is Our House. You learn more about like what exactly the needs are and how you can actually help, help them, not help them, help them deliver services to their communities, and work with them and collaborate with them. So I think always keeping the population that you're trying to serve in focus and making them like your criteria of like who to work with and what to do. I think that's really important.
My advice would be to take all of these people's advice And I think that one thing that as you enter, I want to first say that participation in this sector is not limited to a certain set of skills. As Michael said, if you get creative, you can find a way to participate in this paradigm shift in any sector that you're in, whether that's, you can promote better business models, you can promote better language in the way that we use it, you can promote more awareness. There's ways to do this in every single aspect of your life, whether you have 15 minutes a day to repost something on Instagram, or whether you're studying to enter this as your whole profession. There's always something that you can do. And so whenever you embark on one of those tasks or journeys, think the word accompaniment means so much to us. And we didn't steal that from Partners in Health. They haven't trademarked it or anything. But I first learned about the term accompaniment through the models that they use at this organization called Partners in Health that focuses on health systems development. And healthcare, healthcare is holistic. And I think that humanitarian aid also needs to be holistic, and development, it needs to focus on the whole person. We can't get hyper-focused. We can't make assumptions about what people's needs are, and we can't make assumptions about what we're able to bring to the table to support them. And so when you use accompaniment, it kind of reframes your entire way of thinking and saying, how can I accompany this process? Not how can I be the one to do this process, or how can I be the one, coming under somebody to boost them, or the one coming over and telling them how to do it. It's coming in with as much humility and patience as possible, assessing the situation quietly, and being prepared to think very critically about what you're seeing, hearing, and experiencing, and accompanying people on this journey and looking at it as a shared journey, saying, I have my set of privileges, you have yours, and we're going to embark on this together. That is applicable to any project that you come across with any organization in every sector. And so I hope that whatever you guys end up doing from here, just go into it with that mindset of, I want to accompany you on this journey. I want to be committed to you and reliable and respectful, and we're going to learn and get through this together. So I sincerely hope that all of you guys want to participate in some way. This will be up on our Insight Collaborative YouTube channel, and we'll link all of the organizations in that video as well, so that you guys can see, go and visit their websites, check out their work, support their work. We call it fiscal accompaniment, not donorship, but money undoubtedly in these times helps. We can't keep these programs running and deliver services without fiscal support, unfortunately. So thank you all for participating, and thank you, panelists. It's nice. So refreshing talking to like-minded people. I needed this so badly this week, to be reminded there are others who get it, and we're doing it.
Right. No, and it's so inspiring for, I hope, all of you, but definitely for me. And I have learned so much from all of you. So thank you so much. We'll go ahead and wrap up now, because we've definitely gone over time. So I appreciate you all staying till the end. But feel free to reach out to each other, reach out to Insight Collaborative to, stay connected. And just thank you guys so much. And we really appreciate all of the work that you guys are doing. So thank you, guys.
Thank you all for hosting
Thank you,
this.
everybody.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much.
Good to meet everyone.
Thank you, everyone. It was a pleasure. Thank you so much for all you do and for being here with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful rest of the day.